Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for January 9th, 2023. We're going to take a look at the event that was sponsored yesterday by the Sarah for Senate campaign, which included an extremely important discussion given the context of the current war drive and the danger that this is going to continue to the point of nuclear war. Now, the Russians have responded appropriately to the admissions of betrayal from Angela Merkel and French President Hollande that they never intended to fulfill what they negotiated at Minsk, that they were supposed to be the guarantors of a peace agreement between Ukraine, the government in Kiev, and the eastern regions. But they said they never intended for that to occur. And so the Russians have said, how can we trust negotiations with people who tell us lies? And that's a legitimate point. There's no basis for trust. But the problem is this is spreading fatalism at a moment where what's needed is optimism that an agreement can be reached that's legitimate for security purposes for both sides. Now, meanwhile, the Western media is barraging the population with lies that Ukraine is winning the war, that the Russians are war weary, that they're collapsing, their army is falling apart, and that all that's needed is to continue the unprecedented flow of weapons, with the United States just announcing the largest amount of money for weapons yet in the last days, and that if you keep this going, they can finish the job. But of course, these are the same war hawks who said that the original mobilization by Russia was unprovoked and that the Russians are genetically paranoid to not trust the West. Well, we've seen why they don't trust the West, because they've been lied to repeatedly. So this raises the most important question. Is there a diplomatic exit pathway to peace out of what seems to be an inevitable disaster? Now, this was the center of discussion at the event sponsored by the Diane Sarah for Senate campaign yesterday. She's an independent candidate for U.S. Senate from New York in 2024. There were presentations by Helga Zepp-LaRouche, by former arms control negotiator Scott Ritter, Colonel Richard Black, and nuclear weapons expert Steve Starr, about the status of the NATO war in Ukraine and what to do to avoid a disaster. Now, the presentations were followed by an in-depth and very rich, vigorous discussion of how to overcome what seems to be a dead end. How can a settlement be reached when neither side is willing or able to back down? Now, this became increasingly obvious with the response from Ukraine and NATO to Russian President Putin's call for a ceasefire on Orthodox Christmas Day. Zelensky not only rejected it, but he revoked the Ukrainian citizenship of 13 priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They're threatened with arrest or deportation. The main church of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was seized the days before Christmas so that its members could not attend Christmas services. This was described in very harsh terms by Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman Maria Zakharova. She said, "And this on Orthodox Christmas, this is pure Satanism." What's the reaction to this from the West? Silence. They're clinging to the line that NATO is engaged in defending the freedom and sovereignty of a democratic Ukrainian state. Now, the truth is that Ukraine is being sacrificed for the geopolitical purposes of the NATO forces, the NATO countries, who are committed to a unipolar order and committed to preventing there from being Eurasian integration. They're lined up against the Belt and Road Initiative. They're lined up against the expansion of real economic development policies for Africa, for Asia, for Latin America. in order to defend the collapsing unipolar order. Now, don't take my word on this. Let me tell you what Ukrainian Defense Minister Reznikov said last Thursday. Here's his exact quote. "We are carrying out NATO's mission today without shedding their blood. We shed our blood as we expect them to provide weapons," unquote. So it's acknowledged by the defense minister of Ukraine that you have to give them weapons so that Ukrainians will die for what? For NATO's intent. Now, if you want to see a war stop, you have to stop sending weapons to Ukraine so negotiations can occur. Now, what this requires is a different level of discussion. And what came out of the SARE symposium was the idea that we have to put principles above party, that we have to go to a higher level. And this was what was developed by Helga Zepp-LaRouche in her 10 fundamental principles of how to achieve peace. Now, here's what she said in this discussion. She said, "I have written 10 principles for this to be discussed. The 10th principle, I think, is the most important. It is the idea that man is good, his nature is good, and that all evil in the world comes from a lack of development and therefore can be overcome." She went on to say, "I would encourage everybody to join in a discussion as to how to get out of this, because to stop the war is the first step. But we are creative human beings who can decide how we can live together in the 21st century and hopefully the many millennia beyond." And so she asked viewers to join our movement and mobilize to place principles of natural law at the center of relations between sovereign states. That's the only way you can solve this problem. If you think you can trust the NATO governments, if you can trust Scholz or Macron or Joe Biden or Sunak, if you think you can trust them, just look at what they've done, what they've said. Neither Scholz nor Macron has stated criticism of the confessions of Hollande and Merkel when they said, "We negotiated for the Minsk Accord not to stop the killing of Ukrainian civilians of Russian origin in eastern Ukraine, but to give time for Ukraine to have a military buildup." How is that the basis of statecraft? That's lying. That's a violation of international law. And so that's the problem that we face. And so it's important that people such as Scott Ritter were engaged with Mrs. LaRouche in this dialogue yesterday. And Scott said, "Look, I don't think that negotiation is possible." And he said, "But I would hope you could convince me of that." And that was part of the discussion that proceeded. That's the discussion all of us have to have with those we talk to who are skeptical that there are any solutions. We have to make solutions, and they will come not from concessions, not from accepting the axioms that undergird the present unipolar order, but getting out of that, getting above it. That's the philosophical challenge of statecraft. And that requires people who are ordinary citizens to engage in the process, to make it clear that we're not going to tolerate leaders who are acting on behalf of corporate cartels, on private interests, who don't care who dies in war, who will impose sanctions that kill children, as we've done over and over again from the West, and are continuing to do so today, even though those sanctions are backfiring now and threatening lives in the Western countries. So this idea of principle over party, I ask you to join us in this. I'll be posting a link to an event that will take place on Tuesday of a discussion of what about international law, Mrs. Merkel. And I hope we'll have the SARE symposium posted soon. Look on her website, SARE for Senate, or on the Schiller Institute website. It should be posted later today. So thanks for joining me today. I'll be back tomorrow.